Welcome to the Cisco TelePresence VCS System Configuration Video Guide. My name is Michael McGarry, a Product Manager within the Cisco TelePresence Systems Business Unit. This is the continuation of 6 videos which will guide you through the basic configuration of a VCS. This is Part 2B, Dial Plans. So let's go ahead and start with our System Status Overview page. Like we have in the previous sections, and we're going to go to VCS configuration, and this time we're going to go to dial plan. Underneath dial plan we have 4 different configurations that we can access, and we're going to start with configuration. Underneath configuration we have an indirect calls to unknown IP addresses. Now, we previously had created a subzone with membership rules for subnets. Those RFC19 addresses that we configured in subzone membership rules now are considered known IP addresses. Therefore, if we send a call to a 192.168.1.1 IP address, that would actually be within the known IP address range, and therefore it would try to do a call setup directly to that particular IP address. And it would not go indirectly to a VCS expressway or firewall traversal server. We can also configure a fallback alias. This is where we might want to actually have a fallback alias of maybe info at the domain, and we can configure that. Now, we might want to actually take this default fallback alias is actually for inbound dialed calls to this VCS. This is probably better put on the VCS expressway, although you can actually do this to the VCS control as well. Info@cisco.com may be an IP gateway of some type, like in a video IVR, or you could actually take and forward that to an MCU. So maybe if the IP address of the VCS expressway is dialed, it's sent to an MCU. Underneath the dial plan, we're going to go to transforms. Now, transforms you should be very, very careful of. Only do a minimum amount of transforms. These are global in nature and apply to all dialing rules. So if you perform a transform is done before any searches occur to any of the local zones or remote zones. So you want to be very careful not to do a lot of these. I typically like to take and put 3 different global transforms in. One is on the page right now. What this particular global transform does is it actually transforms an IP address at a domain into just the IP address. This is using regular expressions, and we're basically saying I want to have a 1 to 3 digits dot 1 to 3 digits dot 1 to 3 digits dot 1 to 3 digits at the domains, or locally configured domains. Those would be my local domains that are configured under the SIP configuration. So now that we've done that, that allows a Mobi client, perhaps, to actually type an IP address into the Mobi client directly. The Mobi client and lots of other SIP clients will automatically add the domain for which it's configured if a domain is not specified. And therefore this accomplishes converting an IP address from the IP address at domain into just the IP address. The next configuration that I want to do is I want to create another global transform to say if it does not include a domain, add one. And in this case I'm going to go ahead and add a transform. I'm going to use a regular expression for this. So the description is going to be if no domain, add domain. I'm going to use a regular expression, and my pattern string is going to be open parenthesis, open bracket, square bracket, caret, at, close square bracket, splat or star, and close paren. We're going to replace that with a \1 at a domain, and we're also going to specify to be enabled, and we're going to create the transform. Okay, now we've created 2 transforms. We're going to add one more transform, which is one I like to add on the VCS Expressway specifically. You can add it to the VCS control as well. This particular transform, what it is going to do is when we receive call using just the IP address, so just a call setup message was sent directly using an IP address instead of a domain name, then what we're going to take is we're going to convert that into a domain name. And specifically the regular expression that we're going to use in this case is going to be caret open paren dot star close paren at, and then I'm going to open a paren. I'm going to use a special environment variable here, which is IP version 4 with a pipe, which means or, IPv6, close paren, and then I'm going to open a paren again, a dot star, and a close paren. The third parenthesis set, which is the dot star at the end, actually is for additional parameters that may be included on top of the IP address. So maybe a colon port number, or maybe we might have a colon port number, semicolon something in the dial string, so we're going to go ahead and include that. Therefore, our replace will be \1, which is the first parenthesis, at cisco.com, and then in this case we're going to do a \3. And that will include, if there is something else, we'll go ahead and include that in the dial. I'm going to put this as a priority 2, and I'm going to create the transform. So now we have 3 global transforms, and that's all we need. We shouldn't really be adding much more than this. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to dial plan, and then we're going to go to search rules. The search rules are where we can actually tell it how things are dialed, and in this case, I have a couple search rules already. It looks like one was accidentally configured. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that one. This local zone is one that's automatically created for you, and this will dial only aliases for which an actual match occurs. However, there are a number of different things that we may want to take and search for on top of this one. One that comes to mind is if I'm making calls from a SIP client. A SIP client is usually going to add the domain. If I take and add the domain, and I'm using an E164 address on H.323, that means that I cannot actually make a call to an E164 address. Therefore, I need to add a search for that particular function, and in this case I'm going to add a rule, and this particular rule I'm going to call local zone E164 at domain, and I'm going to strip the domain off. I'm going to use a priority of 49 for this particular one, which will do it before the any match. So in this case I'm going to use source any. I'm going to not turn on authenticated. I'm going to actually do a pattern match here. So this is an alias pattern match. So we're going to change to alias pattern match. We're going to use a regular expression for this particular one. And the regular expression is going to look like this. And what this is a begins with a digit, so it's the caret open parenthesis \D plus, that's digit of 1 or more characters, close parenthesis, at, and then I'm going to use a variable from the environment, which is the %local domains %, which again, that's the SIP domains that are configured on this VCS. And I'm going to go ahead and include the dot star at the end because there may be some other colon port number or something that may have been sent on the call setup message. And I'm going to replace it with just the \1, which will just specify the first pattern match. Now I'm going to go ahead and continue. My target zone is the local zone. So I'm going to change to local zone here, and of course we're going to leave this enabled, and now we're going to create the search rule. Now, since I had created a remote zone, I may want to actually add a search rule for sending calls to that remote zone. And in this case, we're going to take and call this the TSBU alpha zone, and we're going to just call this any alias. And I like to take and use priority 100 for remote zones, 150 or 200 for firewall traversal servers, and I also like to do 50 for my local zone. That takes and prioritizes my local registered devices over remote zone devices. And I'm going to just allow the VCS to go ahead and search all of those. The search is relatively quick and doesn't take a whole lot of time, so I might as well just go ahead and do this so that I search local before I go remote. So in this case, we're going to take and use the any alias, and we're going to continue, and our target zone for this particular one is going to be the TSBU alpha VCSC, and that's my remote zone, and I'm going to leave the priority of 100 there, and I'm going to go ahead and create the search rule. Now, I might want to also be able to dial an IP address. IP addresses are treated differently than aliases and patterns. So therefore, we're going to create another search rule, and we're going to allow IP address dialing on my local zone. So this is where I'm going to put local zone, and I'm going to put address, IP address dial. And remember, the priority for my local zone is going to be 50, so this is not going to compete at all with the any alias, because if it's an IP address, it's not going to be an alias, and if it's an alias, it's not going to be an IP address. So there's no conflict there. I'm just going to go ahead and use the priority of 50. My any source, and I'm not going to make a authenticated, and this time I'm going to say any IP address. I'm going to continue, and I'm going to tell it to use the local zone as my target zone, and I'm going to leave it enabled. And now I have created all of my search rules. Really, I want to take and use less search rules, the better. If I can allow things to happen where I'm searching for things like, for instance, E164 at domain without actually having to specify a whole lot of extra digits in these pattern matches, then that's actually the better. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to debug this in the future. Okay? Now, there's one other thing, and that is some advanced stuff. So this is not in the basic configuration, but there is the ability to use a remote policy server. We are not going to configure a remote policy server, but if there is one configured and you don't understand what it is, you might want to delete it or figure out what it is, but this is more for advanced configuration. Thank you, and we're going to advance to Part 3, Applications, but thank you for joining me for Part 2B.